Hey Brian, how are you?
Hey, Sammy, I'm doing well. Good to be on the show.
Thank you for being here. Before we get started and diving into some of the amazing questions that I think I'm going to learn about, and hopefully the audience will as well, tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey to how you got where you're at now.
Yeah, so I do my own consulting. I consult around leadership development and executive coaching. In the past, I've been a VP of HR, an executive in different human resources or leadership development roles. And then about 10 years ago, started at my consulting practice. I live in the San Francisco Bay Area. I have done a lot of ultra distance endurance events, which I think we're probably going to dive into a little bit today. And I'm a father of two boys and husband of here in the Bay Area. So that's the nutshell of who I am, Sammy.
That's awesome. And yes, we're definitely going to talk a lot about the ultra endurance athlete part of it because obviously this podcast is gearing towards discipline and finances and fitness. And it doesn't really get more fit than being able to do an ultra endurance marathon. But for those who don't know what that is, can you explain a little bit of what that marathon length is and how it works?
Yeah, so a marathon's 26.2 miles, and an ultra distance marathon on the running side is generally considered anything over that. They often start at a 50K or about 30 miles. On the cycling, and I've done them both in cycling and in running. On cycling, there isn't as clear a definition. But it's often considered something of 100 miles or more is when you're getting into that distance. But for a marathon, for running, it's a little clearer. It's generally over 26.2 miles.
Yeah, just you say that very nonchalantly. I think my max was like a 10K that I've
You,
ever
you
been
know,
able to run.
it's okay, and that's not something to be ashamed of. I actually think people that are running the 5 and 10Ks, if more of us did that, we would not have the health issues that we have today. We would not have the weight issues that we have today, especially here in the United States. And so I think those are good distances. They're not hard on the body. It doesn't take long to do that. And it's something anybody can get up to. I actually believe anybody can get up to running a marathon. And what surprised me as I started to dig into the research is only about 1% of the US populations run them. And so often people say, oh, I could never run it. And it pulls at my heart because you probably could. It is a physical activity, but it's a lot up here. It's definitely a mental activity, and how you get through those mental challenges is a key part of it. But most people, I believe, could do it if they
Yeah,
wanted to.
that was the big one I was gonna say if you want to, and we'll get into some of the mental things needed when you have runner's high, and hopefully you can explain a little bit about what that feels like.
Yeah.
But how did you like become an endurance athlete? Is it starting doing the 5, 10K and then building up into half marathon? Because unless you're like David Goggins, you don't like just stumble into the registration form, be like, oh, I'm gonna do this next weekend. Like I assume there's some
Yeah.
sort of progression, right?
There is, and I haven't. I've been more of a cyclist.
Mhm.
At my core, I'm a cyclist, and I have cycled my entire life. I remember doing my first long distance event. I was kind of middle teenagers. I forget exactly what year it was, and cycled 200 miles from the San Francisco Bay Area where I live up into Yosemite. And it was over the course of 4 days. So it was 50 miles a day. And at the time, it's like, that was like this a big thing. And then I just expanded out further. And then I did a couple of trips down from Canada. So they were 500 or 700 or 1,000 miles over a course of a week or 2 weeks. And then the longest bike tour I did was across the United States, which was 4,000 miles from Newport, Oregon to Newport, Rhode Island, and that was 50 days. So I've always been into cycling, and I've done a bunch of 100-mile one-day rides. I've done a number of 200-mile rides, and I was trying to figure out how do I push it even further from the 200 miles? And I wanted to understand, where does the mind and the body, where do those break down at what point? And I thought by doing 300 miles, I thought that would be it. I thought it would be the point where my body says, it's done, Brian, no more. And about 275 miles in, I'm almost done with the ride. I can see the finish line. It's my first time doing something 24 hours. So through the night without sleep. And 275 miles in, it's probably 2 or 3 in the morning, and I'm not far away. I felt I didn't see that limit. And I was able to go that far. It was hard, there's no doubt about it, but I didn't feel that limit. And it got me thinking about, we often put limits in our head.
Mm.
And some of those times those limits hold us back. So before I even got to the finish line of the 300-mile bike ride, and it took me 24 and a half hours, I got another goal to run a marathon, and I'd never been a runner. And this was probably 15 years ago. And I thought, okay, I'll run a marathon. And I know how to train. I know that I can push my body. And so it wasn't whether I could do it. It was, I just need to get up to speed. And you start off running 2 miles, and then you run 4 miles, and then 5 miles. And eventually you get to that point. So it's just always been who I am. And I also like to have one big thing every year that kind of pushed me. And so I did the marathon, and I thought, okay, now what? And I did a couple 50 milers, I did a 100-miler, and then I did with a 200-mile run around Lake Tahoe, all at elevation. And that was quite an event.
Yeah, we're definitely going to dive into the Lake Tahoe 205-mile run in just over 3 days. It just that's an incredible feat in itself. But when you're talking about the gains and the progression from being able to do like 50 to 100 and all the cycling, and then where does the progression kind of taper off, or like when do you more likely become like a parent? Because I've been training in the gym weightlifting for like almost 7 years now. It looks like the weight that I'm able to lift now is remarkable compared to when I was the skinny kid who wasn't able to do anything. But you don't really notice it because you're the one doing it every day until you meet new people and they're like, "Oh wow, man, you're not skinny." And I was like, "Huh?" You have that type of mentality. Obviously, it's a totally different realm where you're more on the cardio side. But when did you become a parent that like, hey, okay, I know that I'm like a cardio expert and I can go all day if I need to?
Yeah, I don't know that I would call myself a cardio expert. I'm no doctor, know how my body works. And I think it's probably the same thing with what you were doing in the gym is you start off probably working on lifting the bar. And then the next thing you know, you put 2 5-pound weights on either side of that bar. And then the next thing is there's 2 10 pounds, and then it just gets bigger and heavier. And that's the same thing with running or with cycling. And I talk about this in the book with anything is you start off small and you build on that. And that's how you build your confidence. And it's what I call iterate. The book is called Epic Performance, and the I stands for iterate. And how do you work from the small up to something bigger, and something bigger is what you're trying to do. So I didn't start when I had the goal to run a marathon. I didn't go out and run 20 miles. I remember it vividly. I was working from home. This was years ago, working from home. And I thought, okay, I need to go out and get a pair of running shoes. And I went out at lunchtime to the local running store, picked up a pair of running shoes, came back and went for a 4-mile run. And then this is shortly after I had ridden my bike 300 miles. So I was in pretty good shape. I did that 4-mile run. I came back and I finished up some of my afternoon conference calls. And then I had to walk upstairs to go to the bathroom, and my legs hurt. And it's like what shape you're in for a bike ride is different than running shape. And I realized it's okay. I'm not in long distance running shape now, but I ran 4 miles. Next week, I got to be able to run 5 miles as my long run. And then the following week, it's 6 miles. And so you just have to have that mindset that it's start off small and then get a little bit better each time.
Yeah, I definitely agree. When I was reading over your epic performance, the eye of iterate is my favorite part. I think that's really where all the discipline comes in. And to me, that's the most important part. I'm a little biased, but tell us a little bit about the full epic and how you apply that not only to fitness, but in leadership as well.
Yeah, so what Epic Performance, the title of the book is Epic Performance, Lessons from 100 Executives and Endurance Athletes on Reaching Your Peak. And so I interviewed 100 people. About 75% of them were executives, C-level executives, people at the top of their career path, founders of companies, CEOs, CXOs, and then about 25% were ultra distance athletes. Because I wanted to find out if the characteristics or the behaviors that somebody does in the ultra distance world how they get up to speed is similar to that in the business world. And I did find that. So what EPIC performance stands for, the EPIC, the E is envision. How do you envision the big things in life that you want to accomplish? How are you looking out, not just a year or 2 years, but how are you looking out 10, 20, 30 years out? What are the big things that you want to do? How do you envision it in your head in order to be able to go after it? The P is, how do you put a plan in place? When you see that, if we're talking about sports stuff, if you know you want to do an Ironman, then you've got to be able to see it. You got to know, which one am I going to do? And you got to be able to envision that crossing that finish line. And then with the P, you put a plan in place to do it. How am I going to train? The iterate is, how do you work your way up to those items? This is when you're doing the training, and that's, as you mentioned, it is the discipline. You don't start off running a marathon. You start off running a mile or 2 miles, and then it's 3 miles and 4 miles. And that's what iterate is. Start off small and build, and you get your confidence. The C is, how do you collaborate with someone who's gone before you? I can't think of anything that's really that different that somebody couldn't provide guidance on what you're doing. And even when you think about putting a man on Mars, we've never put a man on Mars, but we put a rover. We've sent a rocket there. We put a man on the moon. And how do you learn from people that have done that? So there's 1 million people that have done a marathon. Go talk to them. There's not a lot of people that have done a 200-mile run, but I know some, and I could talk to them. So that's envision, plan, iterate, collaborate. And then lastly, how do you go out and perform it? Eventually, you got to stand at the start line and work your way to the finish line. So iterate gets you to the start line. Perform gets you from the start line to the finish.
And I think it's good that you break it down that way, because yes, if you have nothing else and all you have is iterate, you'll get there eventually, probably. But being able to envision it and get a good plan going, and then asking people for their tips and tricks who've done it before to collaborate, allows you to probably get there a lot faster and smarter without hurting yourself. But what happens when you start? And regardless if you've done all the prep and maybe nerves comes in, maybe it's the weight of the moment, running 205 miles around Lake Tahoe, gonna get tired. You're gonna get fatigued. You're probably gonna have a first runner's wind come in, second wind come in, maybe even a third wind. I don't really.
Oh yeah, you're gonna have a 10th wind that comes and get you. Yeah, yeah.
But within that time, eventually, you're gonna get tired. I have to imagine. I don't know when that number is for you. For me, it definitely will not be past like mile 2. I'd be dying. But like, how do you get back and just continue to between you and the pavement? And that's what every runner has talked about. It's just you and the pavement, one foot in front of the other. To me, that's like the definition of discipline, because you're blocking out all negativity. You're blocking out anything that's unmotivating, if you will, and you're just going to finish this goal. What do you say to yourself, or what do you think to yourself during those moments?
Yeah, you talk about you and the pavement. So for the 200-mile run, I was not on pavement. I was all on remote trails out in the wilderness and running at elevation. So it was me in the dirt. You are going to get tired. You are going to feel miserable. And it is hard. There's no doubt about that. And knowing that helps. But you also have to train through the tired. I remember part of my training plan, there were some times I was exercising 30 hours in a week. And part of the training plan involved me running 4 30-mile runs running a 30-mile run 4 times in 4 days. So Sunday I would run 30 miles. Monday I'd get up, run 30 miles. Tuesday would get up and run 30 miles. Wednesday get up and run 30 miles. And you get to the second or third day and you're tired. And part of the training is knowing, how do you get through that tired? When I started the training, I didn't do 30 miles, 4 30-mile runs. I did 4 5-mile runs in a row, and then 4 10-mile runs in a row, and then 15 and 20. So you just build up that physical capability, and you're also building up that mental capability. You also train for the conditions you are going to experience. Now, I remember there were times I had to get up at 3 a.m. and go out for a long run in order to be back for a 9 o'clock soccer game for my kids or something. So I'd get up at 3 a.m. and I remember one time waking up and it was raining outside. And I don't want to run. It's raining. And that's when you have to get up and go out and do it. Because if you do it during training, when it happens on race day, You've already experienced what it's like to run when it's raining. You know what type of clothes you need. You mentally, you're a step ahead because you've done it. And so when I was doing the Tahoe run and it was, like probably 50 hours in and it was late in the middle of the night and it started to rain, there's that component where it's like, oh, this sucks. I'm not going to make it. Or I've done this before. I know what it's like to run in the rain. I'm going to put my windbreaker on, keep me a little bit drier, and I'm going to keep moving forward. So there's a lot of other techniques I use when you really are hitting the wall, but those are a couple, and we can talk about more if you want. But you got to get out and do the hard stuff in the training. So when it happens on race day, you've already been through it.
Yeah, I think that for sure helps. But I would love to learn a little bit more about some of the other tricks you have, because I don't know if everything you experienced on race day was something you already experienced, or what if that trick, okay, yeah, I've done it before, but I don't want to do it again. Or like you said, it's hour 50 and it took you, I believe you said 76 hours.
Right.
So that sounds like a lot, but it's still only 2/3 of the way. You still have a lot more. You still have a full day of running after that when it started raining. So what do you do to get out of that? Or is there a way maybe you can force yourself to get into another runner's high, another second wind or 10th wind?
Yeah, I think when I sat at the start line, I wasn't thinking I've got to run 200, it was 205 miles. I wasn't thinking I had to run 205 miles. What I was thinking is the first aid station is in 10 miles. And in 10 miles, I'm going to get food and I'm going to be able to sit down for a minute and I'm going to get some whatever drink I want. And then I get there. And then my next spot was 15 miles down the road. So I know I can run 10 miles easily. And so you don't look at it as a 200-mile run. You look at it as a bunch of 10-mile runs or 15-mile runs. And those are easy runs. Those at the time, those were easy runs for me. So you just break it down into smaller components to something that's manageable. Because if you think about, oh man, I got another 150 miles to go, that's a
Yeah.
long way. So I would always think, okay, I only have 10 miles to go. And in 10 miles, I can get a burrito and I can see my wife. And it's like, that's cool.
Yeah.
So those are the type of things that you break it down into the smaller components because we can manage smaller components. And that applies to an endurance activity. It applies to work activities as well. I think the other thing is you really find why you're doing this. There's a lot of people that were saying, I have no desire to run 200 miles that are listening to this. And maybe there's one or two that thought, hey, that's pretty cool. I'd love to try it. But really understand, why are you doing this and do you want to do it? If you don't want to do it, go do something else. Life's too short to do things you don't really want to do in terms of this type of stuff. And how are you going to feel when you get to that finish line? For months leading up to the race, I had envisioned, this is where we go to the envision part. I had envisioned what the finish line was going to look like. I knew that I was going to come across looking filthy dirty. I was going to be tired, but my hands were going to be in the air. I was going to be screaming with excitement. My wife was going to be there and she was going to give me a big hug. And I envisioned that over and over and over. I crossed the finish line more times in my head, a couple hundred times in my head before I actually crossed it in reality. And it was exactly what I envisioned. My hands were in the air. I was filthy dirty, and my wife was there and gave me a big hug. So you got to be able to focus on the little things. You got to be able to envision what it looks like. And then another thing I often think about is, how do you put things into perspective? So when I was doing those 430-mile runs, on day 3, I'm 10 miles into that day's run. So I got 20 more miles to go. I've already got 70 miles on my legs in the last 70 hours or so. And my legs are tired and it's hot. And I started to whine to myself. And because my legs were tired, it's legitimately, they were tired and it was hot. It was August, which is a really hot time in California. And I was thinking, God, I'm just so tired. I don't know that I want to keep running. And I thought about a friend of mine who was dealing with breast cancer. And I thought, what you're going through, Bryan, is completely voluntary. What she's going through isn't voluntary. My pain is temporary. I could stop now, be sitting on a couch in about 20 minutes, eating potato chips, and my pain will be away, gone shortly. Hers wasn't. And it really helped. Not that it wasn't valid that I was tired and hot, but it made me realize somebody's going through a whole lot worse situation. So I just have to suck it up and move forward and put things in perspective as it's not that bad.
When we're talking about the Tahoe run and those aid stations every 10, 15, 20 miles, okay, you can get some food, you can get some drinks, but like going 3 days without sleeping, or where do you sleep? How do you manage that piece? Like use the bathroom, all that stuff?
Yeah, so a bathroom's relatively easy because you are out in the middle of the wilderness, so you can go to the bathroom whenever you want to go. They also have toilets at most of the aid stations. I think they had toilets. So you can manage that. Sleep is a different issue, and you have to train for that. You have to know that you're not going to be sleeping 8 hours a day for a full day. You do whatever you want. My plan was if I was going to sleep at night when the body's used to sleeping at night. And I knew I could go through the first night, and I was going to try to make it to the second night. Wow. It starts at 9 a.m. on the day you leave at 9 a.m. And so I knew I could get 12 out, getting through hours or so till you get to the next wasn't going to be too bad. I'd done 24 hours. So then I just had to get to that second night. And so when I got to, I had thought, okay, I'll sleep for a little bit when I got to that second night. Earlier in the day, I had taken some caffeine pills just to keep me awake. And I got to the aid station where I was planning to sleep, and I went into the van, my support van, to just try to lay down. It was noisy. My head was still wired from the caffeine, and I couldn't sleep. So it's okay, we're going to leave and I'm going to continue on, and I'll try to sleep the next night. Or if I need a point where I just need to lay down, I'll lay down. I got to about 60 hours in, and so I hadn't slept up to the 60-hour point. And I'm coming in, I think it was like 2 a.m. I'm coming into my aid station, and I was just exhausted. I had never reached such an exhaustive state. And I came into the aid station, opened up the van, and my wife, who was comfortably sleeping there, I woke her up. I said, I need to sleep, and kind of kicked her out. And I said, wake me up in 60 minutes. And so my support crew, give them 60 minutes. And I know I was asleep before my head even hit the pillow. Wow. And they woke me up in 60 minutes. And I said, can I have 30 more minutes? And they said, okay, we'll give you 30 more minutes. And I was out, and 30 minutes later, they woke me up, and I felt like a new man. My crew will tell you I did not look like a new man, but it gave me enough to then continue on. So that 90 minutes of sleep was enough for me to finish the last of the race. I was still tired, but
yeah. So you batched it in one hit, essentially.
Yeah, and I had tried to lay down at other aid stations to sleep. For some reason, either it was too noisy. Yeah, I adrenaline, I couldn't. And finally, I got to a point where I was just so exhausted. And I was doing everything I could to get into that aid station to sleep. And it was good because it was at night. And then when they woke me up and I was able to get some food, and then the sun was just starting we were getting a little bit of a daylight. And so it's okay. My body's used to being awake now.
Yeah. And that's where like you ran the 4:30s. It's just like another one of those days, because you wake up in the morning, go for a run. At that point, it's probably what your body felt like.
Yeah, my body felt much worse than that, but it's okay. I got some sleep. I've eaten some good food. And the other thing that was pushing me along is I was constantly in battle, the person who was in 10th place. And so I was now in 11th place trying to get a top 10 finish. And I thought, okay, I just need to catch one person in order to try to get that and then stay ahead of that person. So there was a little bit of all right, I got this. I've got something to focus on, and focus I did on it.
So you got that top 10 finish?
Unfortunately, I didn't. I was in 11th place. I left that aid station with about 30 miles to go, maybe it was. And maybe about 10 miles later, I came across somebody and I passed him, and I thought, okay, I'm now in 10th place. This is great. I went into the final aid station, and I didn't stay there long. And I left in 11th place, but the 10th place person wasn't too far ahead. And I passed him pretty quickly, and he looked terrible. Just He was barely walking and just looked awful. And I thought, okay, that's good. Good for me. Bad for him. Good for
Yeah.
me. And we had, let's see, probably 15 miles to go, or 13, 15 miles to go. And about 5 miles before the end, he was starting to gain on me. And we have a 5 mile descent into the finish line. And I hit a rock and I went down. And had I not hit the rock, he still would have passed me. But I hit the rock, I went down hard, and he came up and he made sure I was okay. And then he took off. He found his third, fourth, fifth wind. And I found out he was like 20 years younger than me. And he just looked like a rabbit going down the hill. And so there was no way I was going to catch him, but it's still okay. And there was a moment when it's like, oh man, I'm so disappointed. I just run 200 miles and I'm disappointed. And no, you can't, you got to shift that.
Yeah.
You ran 200 miles. You should be proud of it. And as I came across the finish line, I was really proud of what I'd accomplished. Came in 11th and still proud of the accomplishment.
No, that is an awesome. It's the fact that you're just rounding down to 200 and that lasts like 5 miles, which is a great achievement for some people. Is just like a rounding error for you. Is like, that's awesome.
And realistically, Sammy, it's 205.5 miles. So I was in 10th place up to 200 miles. Or I got it. I crossed 200 miles in 10th place, and then I hit something hard and I went down, and then it was that last 5.5 miles, and he looked really good. And I got down to the bottom and congratulated him. And so
that's awesome.
And then for the Tahoe 200-mile run, you got 100 hours to finish it. There were times that I was exhausted. There was never a point where it's, I don't want to move forward. I'm going to quit. I never got to that point. But you realize that no matter how miserable you are, it will all be over within that 100-hour time frame. So if you're running a marathon and let's say the cutoff is 8 hours, in 8 hours, your misery is going to be done. No matter what, whether you're halfway through or you're at the end. So wouldn't you want to be at the end? So you have to know how to get through those times. Those are a couple tips I talk about a lot more in the book. And hopefully if in your training you have experienced some level of that misery, that when you see it on race day, it's like, I've been here and I know I can get through it.
Yeah, I definitely agree, especially with the last point. Like I said that to myself a lot as well. Like when it was either going through a hard class at Georgia Tech, or whether it be in a bad situation at work or a tough situation, good or bad, I could be like, okay, this project or this class is going to take a few months. And in the grand scheme of things, a few months, if I live up to 80, is, I don't know, 1% of my life. So it's like, it's probably less even. So it's like, I could deal with anything for that short period of time. And that helps you like chunk it down, whether if you have a lofty goal, to your point, like running 200 miles, but running aid station to aid station, when you break it down like that, you give yourself some confidence. I'm assuming, obviously, based on the similarities between the leadership execs and the C-level execs that you've interviewed and the ultra distance marathons, and obviously you being in both situations yourself, how has being able to build the discipline and understanding that, okay, like you can overcome pretty much many obstacles that a lot of average people or maybe even above average people can't do, and you're able to achieve them. How does that give you the confidence or the ability to the framework to set lofty goals in business or in life, and then chunk it down and use the epic performance to then achieve those as well?
With that confidence comes from smaller successes. So if you were to ask me 30 years ago, could I run 200 miles? I probably would have said, no, that's crazy. But I got to the point where I can run a marathon, and my confidence to be able to go out and do a marathon without really thinking about it came from, I could ride my bike 300 miles. I could ride my bike 200 miles. I could ride my bike across the United States. And it just built that confidence that I knew how my body worked. I knew how to train effectively to get to something like that. And when I ran the marathon, I didn't even know about the 200-mile runs. And so when I did the marathon, it's okay, I know how to do this. I can take it up a notch and go to 50 miles. And I got to 50 miles. It's like, I know how to do this. I can take it up a notch or a couple of notches and go to 100 miles. So that confidence, and it's the same in the business world when I talk to people, you don't start off running your own company. You don't start off being the CEO. You start off at some lower level, and then you work your way up. and you work your way up, and then you're nervous going into that one job, that next level job, but then you get good at it and you build that confidence that allows you to go for the next job. I liken it to learning how to swim. When somebody's learning how to swim, you don't learn how to swim in the deep end of the pool. Most of us don't. You learn in the shallow end where you can put your feet if need be. And you get comfortable swimming in the shallow end. And then as you get comfortable, you move closer to the deep end. The water is the same water. So the ability to swim in the deep end and the shallow end is the same physically. Mentally is where it's different. Build that resilience and you build that confidence up in the shallow end, and it gives you that confidence to move. So confidence comes from being successful in smaller areas, and then it just grows.
Was there any carryover of building that confidence or early successes that you said, okay, I've been able to run a marathon or be able to cycle across the US, I can now do this in business? Or did you really have to kind of like start from scratch and build those successes from ground up?
Yeah, no, and there are a lot of similarities, and I'll give you an example. And it was one of my failures. Is a number of years ago, the superintendent of our school asked if I would run a $330 million bond campaign. So the goal was to raise $330 million through an election where the people's taxes would pay for this bond, and it allowed for a lot of work at the school district. I had never done any political campaign before. I didn't know how it worked. I knew how to manage projects really well. I also knew that I could learn how to do it. I was smart enough, I felt I was smart enough to figure out things along the way or get the right people in to help me. So when he asked me, some people will say, oh, God, I've never done this before. I don't know how to do it. No, let's get somebody else. I had the opposite reaction, was like, wow, I've never done something like this before. It could be cool. I could learn something, and let's go for it. And I learned a tremendous amount. I do believe we ran a really effective campaign. We lost. So it's okay. That could knock my confidence down. It didn't end up, because I had the confidence that I can figure things out and I can withstand a loss. And so surprisingly, another friend of mine asked me to help him. He was running for mayor and asked me to run his campaign. Did that, lost. And it's funny because as we finished the election up, there was a woman I worked very closely with on this both those campaigns, and she just ran her own campaign. She ran, not her own campaign, she ran a campaign for somebody else. And she sends me a text this morning. She goes, I lost, I'm 0-3. And I responded to her. I said, it's not that we're bad at running campaigns. We're just bad at picking campaign issues. So that confidence of ability to go out and run something like that came from successes at work. It came from successes biking or running. And I lost. Do I feel bad? No. It's just sometimes you have to push yourself a little bit further, where you're going to go to that point where you didn't succeed. And you just have to learn from it and try to figure out how you can be better the next time.
Yeah, I think for me, I consider myself quite a competitive person, and it's weird when I say that, and then I followed up with this statement. I don't mind losing as long as we as a team put 100% effort. And I like it at the basketball. I feel if my team, or me specifically, we put a 100% effort, no matter what, we're never going to lose. Because some people always take it a little bit more lax. Some people will take it a little bit easier, and your effort will win eventually, assuming you have a certain level of skills. If you put in your best effort in the campaign and you lose, it's okay, because you did the outcome, and that's what gives you the confidence that you could stay 100% effort the entire time, regardless of the result.
Yeah, sometimes you are going to put 100% effort in, and you're still going to fail at what you're doing. And that's not a bad thing, because if you are always, and I learned this from my dad probably when I was 10. And we were skiing in Breckenridge, Colorado. It was the end of the day, and I come skiing down, and in my head, I look like this amazing professional skier, and I'm 10. I know I'm not that good. And I and I do a sliding stop, and I spray snow all over him, and I said, man, I haven't fallen all day. And he that proud, I'm so good, I haven't fallen. And he looks at me and he compliments me on my form. He goes, when you're not falling, you're not pushing yourself hard enough. So sometimes, with those campaigns, I pushed myself and I gave 100% of effort, and I lost. And as I told a friend of mine who ran for mayor, I said, I would rather lose with you than win with the other person. And so it's being able to put yourself out there. It's great to win. But if you never lose, the question I would pose is, are you pushing yourself? Are you competing enough? You look at I've played a lot of soccer, and when we would play against teams that were clearly better than us, that's when we'd learn the most, even though we lost, but it would push ourselves further.
Yeah, you play up to the competition, and that's awesome, but you should never play down to the competition if they're not as good. But it's a lot harder to do that in practice, I feel like, for some people. That's awesome. You've definitely given me some inspiration to be more well-rounded in terms of my fitness journey as well. And I know I hope a lot of people are inspired as well from this conversation. But where can people find you and learn more, maybe get a copy of the book?
Yeah, so thank you, Sammy, for having me on. So the couple ways you can get in touch with me. You can find the book on Amazon and the major retailers. The book is Epic Performance: Lessons of 100 Executives and Endurance Athletes on Reaching Your Peak. So go to Amazon, you can get it there. It's in the Kindle version or a hardbound version. The other thing is, you can connect up with me on LinkedIn, Bryan Gillette, and you can look for me, or go to my website, which is epicperformances.com. So that's EPIC performances with an S.com. And that'll link you to where the book is. I have an assessment to evaluate how well people do on epic performance, and you get that assessment if you go through the book. And I'll show you, here's where your strengths are. Are you really good at envisioning or in iterating? And then you use the book in order to build up on the areas you're good at to get even better, or work on some of the areas you may not be as good.
I definitely will have links to all that, and probably take that test as well, because I'm curious to see where I lack, and so I can improve on as well. But I really appreciate this conversation, Bryan. I learned a lot, and thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you, Sammy. It was great talking to you.
Thank you for listening to another episode here on YouTube. For more videos like this, please like and subscribe.